Kia ora Tātou everybody, my name's Colin McLeod
And I'm Laurel Anna.
and we thought it might be a good idea to put together a clip that introduces the pack on Jesus, which is called
Jesus, Real and Radical.
Tell us about it, Laurel, you're the one that's done all the work.
Well, it's a bit of a step up from the old Jesus the Christ unit. The real and radical, the real part is Jesus really is a person, which sometimes our young people don't always believe or get, that actually there's pretty good evidence for Jesus being a real human being. They just automatically assume it's all fairy tales. And the radical part is that for a lot of young people, Jesus seems to be pretty much co-opted into adult behave yourself sort of life, and they don't see how Jesus could be a radical person both in his time and in our time.
So you're meaning for a lot, he's boring. Why would young people be interested today? Okay.
Exactly.
And you've got a counter to that as to why kids should be engaged with it.
Well, we try.
Yeah, there you go.
So we start off by looking at things that should be fairly familiar with senior RE teachers already, looking at the evidence for Jesus through Christian and non-Christian sources, and then looking at Jesus' titles in the New Testament, that sort of thing. And the earliest ideas about who Jesus was. So that's all the stuff about, whether Jesus was human or divine, whether he was 50-50, whether he was all one or the other,
right.
All those sort of ancient heresies, which we're not expecting the young people to, learn the names of all the different heresies off by heart, but we really want them to understand that there were quite different perspectives, and they were sort of jostling for a place, and the church made some decisions through the councils about what was the truth of it. Some of the different understandings are still very much around at the moment, and it will help young people to sort of think about, well, what sort of perspective is that person putting forward? And they are around in different denominations today, so that could be helpful as well.
We also talked when we were planning that sense of Jesus as being a saviour. Just what does that mean? Is that something that you climb into?
Absolutely. So we introduced them to the word soteriology, and there are some, in terms of vocabulary, there's some difficult words in this content area, but they can learn those. They're not that difficult. So a lot of young people and adults too don't really understand why Jesus' nasty death on a cross, how it actually saves you, and why would a loving God want that nasty thing to happen, and why would that be the mechanism of salvation? So we look at different models of salvation that the church has had over the centuries, and in the end there are multiple models, and the Catholic Church actually doesn't come down on the side of any one particular model as being the answer. From the Catholic point of view, it's Jesus's entire incarnation, life and teachings, death and resurrection that are part of what salvation is. So they get to discuss those, and I think that will be quite interesting for some of them.
So tell us what you've done in terms of how you've tried to structure it so it's accessible to the kids. So Summer, you've taken these really often complex ideas and you're trying to present them so that we know that the average year 13 isn't going to bring a whole lot of Bible knowledge. No. And certainly, yeah.
Well, I suppose in terms of the different models and of or different understandings of who Jesus was, most of that's is graphically represented in the PowerPoints, and it should be sort of fun. And I'm encouraging young people to actually create their own, their own graphic designs of what it means for Jesus to be human and divine as well. So, I mean, those are things that people have struggled with forever. So it's part of the continuing thing. And I think that, one of the things about this content area is that we're really wanting the young people to have a chance at being theologians themselves, so that they think about who Jesus is for themselves. And in the sixth pack, which is called 2,000 Years and Still Thinking. We're sort of trying to bring it up. So, you know, the early church was struggling with who Jesus was or is. And then now there are still questions to be asked that fit our times. So the questions of, you know, how is Jesus the Christ of the poor when the church always seems to have stood on the side of the rich? How can a male saviour save everybody else? You know, save women, for instance. What does Jesus mean to people from other religions or people who have no belief? Does Jesus still save those people? Different cultural contexts and perspectives, what do they contribute to our understanding of Jesus? And now the whole eco-Christology. So there's a whole lot of conversations out there that are going on at the moment, and really for young people who are very interested in this, if they're considering, you know, going to university in the future, that they know that there are actually interesting conversations going on. It's not all just tied back in the past. People are struggling with what Jesus means now, not just, you know, 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, so you and I were talking about, we've purposely bookended our 5-year-olds when they start with Tātou Whakapono, they climb into who is this person of Jesus, and we have set it up so that one of the key areas that they climb into before they leave Catholic schools is Jesus the Christ, we used to call it now, but that Jesus radical, real and radical. We look at the historical Jesus and we look at these elements. Why aren't we just telling them what the church thinks? Why aren't we just, you know, capturing all of those things? Why are we inviting them into the conversation?
I think it's really important that young people think these things through themselves, and that they don't feel that they've just got to buy in automatically to what the church says. I mean, obviously, we do want them to accept the church's teachings, but they have to come at that with thoughtfulness and with a genuine faith and belief. We can't sort of just dump the stuff on them and expect them to accept it without thinking it through.
And part of that too is that our understanding isn't that every single kid in the class is a card-carrying Catholic.
Exactly.
So there's an invitation that's here as well as a...
Yeah.
But you do a heck of a lot of work. There's a lot of notes that sit behind this that actually structures it for the kids. We're not just throwing them to the dogs, if you like, in terms of...
So there's a lot of notes, and the PowerPoints will help you structure lessons that will hopefully make the notes more accessible. So the notes are obviously written for the teachers primarily, although some of those have been used to create notes for students to do their own discussions, and that have a go at being theologians themselves. So some of it's been a bit broken down and spelled out for them.
Can you describe some of your thinking too around the different capacity of kids in terms of their intellectual ability, you know, literacy ability and stuff? You've tried to factor that into these resources too.
Yeah, that's difficult because this is a very theology is a very literacy heavy topic, and so there is a lot of language, but I think this can be, you know, when you take a look at the PowerPoints, when you have a look at the notes, you are going to be thinking, gee, this is way beyond some of our kids, and it will be, but I think the core things are quite accessible, and it's a matter of bringing those down to sort of a simpler level. I think don't get too hung up on the difficult sides of it, because I think most of it is fairly readily simplified. You know, it's core basic Christianity in the end.
And I've seen your PowerPoints, and certainly the graphics and the way that you piece the ideas together too. They're designed to sort of be clear, but also give teachers an opportunity to be able to pitch it to the level of the kids.
Exactly, and designed to hopefully lead kids along a path so that we get to the complex ideas through steps.
Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed looking at the sheer amount of resources that are there, I'm not sure how easy it would be to cover it all in a block of teaching, a term.
I think if you were to do absolutely everything, the term would be pretty jam-packed. I think that you have to make judicious sort of selections from some things. But one of the things that I would say is that the material at the beginning, the first two packs on Jesus of Nazareth and Jesus the Christ, now some of that will have been covered in Year 11. So Jesus's world... a lot of that you could just revise back to Year 11. They should have done that in Year 11 already. Right. So it's really just a refresher. So Pack 1, quite a lot of that would be refresher. The Jesus, the Christ, the titles, the Nicene Creed they may well have done previously as well. So those are areas where, really you need to sort of test out, do a bit of a pre-test and see how much the young people know in your class, what they've come through with, because you might find you can cut those down considerably.
Right.
Which will leave you a bit more time for the other things. The content area ends with some work on liturgies. So the idea is that it would be preferable if this was taught at the beginning of the year, because it's the prayer aspect, AO, for this is around liturgies of Lent and Easter. So the idea is to perhaps get the class involved in producing a liturgy for the school, Stations of the Cross, or Holy Thursday, whatever. So there is a practical side to this.
Yep.
At the end.
What would your tips be for the teachers if you were going to give them, say, 3 things to bear in mind as they leap into this unit? What might that be?
I would say read the notes carefully and don't get too overwhelmed. But you shouldn't need to go outside the notes to do this. And you really shouldn't feel that you need to be completely au fait with all of this yourself. I never remember all the names for the different heresies,
Right.
So you're presenting this to give young people an impression more than anything, because we know that they'll walk away from this unit and they won't remember what a Gnostic or an Ebionite was, you know, because I struggle to, and probably the rest of us do too. But we want them to know that it was all up for debate, that there was a time when the church was sort of, ideas were coming and going, and it took the Holy Spirit within the church to sort of solidify that, and that conversation keeps going.
Right.
And I think my other hint would be, it's some of this is quite hard to come up with what we might think of really exciting activities, but to try to be as creative as you can. And I know that at Year 13, that can be difficult in terms of time, because you don't have the time to do a lot of extra creative stuff. But probably the most important thing for this whole unit is discussion and questions and talking together in class. So yes, it's fun to do, artwork or whatever, but it's the conversations that are the most important.
Right. So this obviously is part of a new curriculum, and it's a whole new topic that already existed in the old curriculum. Why should they do the new stuff and not just keep doing what they've always done?
Because there's a different emphasis on this.
Right.
So I think there's a couple of things that we're doing that haven't been done at any depth before. So we do really talk about transubstantiation, for instance.
Okay.
So, why is the Eucharist so special? Where is Jesus in that? I think that's really important. That's been played down before. I think the whole radical Jesus, while we have talked about that in places, perhaps more when we did biblical studies, we did Luke, and we talked about the social justice aspect. I think what Jesus asks of us today, and talking about that radical response that he's asking in terms of our attitudes towards wealth and poverty, to service to others, to inclusivity, I think those really come to the fore in this unit as well.
Right. So obviously Year 13s, they're fixated with credits. We understand it, so a lot of teachers. There's more than just credits going on here?
Well, this is the guts of the church, really, isn't it? I mean, do you want credits on a piece of paper academically, or do you want to get to heaven? Is basically what we're talking about here.
Well, see, that's it. Describing it, and I think it's something that we sidestep in the previous stuff as well. That often that's part of the radicalness, isn't it? That actually there's something really important going on, and there's the promise of salvation, that promise of everlasting life.
I think it's something that often, because we are really sensitive to the fact that there are young people in our classes who are not Catholic, or maybe baptised Catholic and really becoming quite anti. We've always been a bit shy to actually say these things, and I think, this is our last chance before the rangatahi leaves school, that we really have a chance to say, this is actually what the faith stands for. This is the hard part, the pointy part, and it's what we, if this is what it's all about.
And look, and my looking through your materials, Laurel, I think one of the wonderful things about it is that it's got heaps of really concrete material that scaffolds the learning for the kids, but there's a heart to it that's invitational for them to engage at a faith level. We don't expect them to engage at a faith level, but the invitation is absolutely there. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
So last comments then before we wrap this up for teachers and kids from you. What would you break your heart if this didn't happen in the teaching and learning of this unit?
I think there'd be a bit that would break my heart. I never thought that I would find the transubstantiation thing so interesting to do, but there's a brilliant clip from Brother Casey and his breaking the habit,
right.
Which is really fantastic, and I think really makes it really evident to the kids. I think the whole idea of how Jesus is countercultural today is really important, and it'd break my heart if that wasn't covered. I also think the 2,000 years in still thinking, that to get across to young people that they've got a part in this. This is not just for people in universities sitting in some country overseas. This is, who they are as people. This is who they are as people who live in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is people, who they are as young people who are concerned about the environment. All these sorts of things. I think that they should understand that they can be theologians, and that they have a part to play in the future of the church and their understanding of Christ.
Yep, awesome. I mean, it's being part of the journey. We're not just providing a summative ending, we're actually saying that this is something that continues.
Yeah. And regards credits, we don't know what the future standards might bring, and hopefully we'll be able to adapt any future standard to an assessment that we can use this material for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's in an absolute state of flux, and we planned all this content area based on the early drafts of what the standards were going to look like.
Exactly. And
then the ministry has changed them and paused them, and so we have to be people of faith in this space too. So look, it then falls to me to just wrap this up. Hopefully it's been of some use to you, the conversations. We're always available via email. Your REAs, of course, are engaging in this space as well. I just want to thank Dr. Laurel Lanner for all the work that she's done in this particular unit, as well as others, and hope that you enjoy it as much as she has in putting it all together for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Laurel.
Thanks.